Today we are seated with Angelica Caiza, who specializes in human bat relationships and research in bats. So why don't we begin by uh, you, Angelica, telling us a bit about who you are, um, your research focus in bats specifically, and what exactly got you into bats and the relationship with humans.
Like you said, my name's Angelica Caiza. I'm from Ecuador. Um, I am a biologist. I have that one in my background, but I also a social scientist. I came here to the Netherlands 7 years ago to work in my master, and later on I stay here and I am working now in my PhD. What is my research focus about? Well, like I said, as a biologist, I work a lot with animals and wildlife. But at one point, I also encountered the social interactions with wildlife and all of the issues around it. So I was wondering, what, because with biology, you can get a lot of data and do a lot of research and for etc. But in if you want to do conservation or something related to that, you have to really understand the people. So then I switched to do a master with the line of social science, and now my PhD is a combination of both, like human practices and also bat ecology. So I'm combining both of my PhD. Uh, how did I get into bats? I started my internships at the university in the Department of Mammals, and they have also a museum collection. So Ecuador is like a hot spot for biodiversity, and we have a lot of bats there. I mean, if we make a comparison with Europe, whole Europe have 54 species of bats, but Ecuador has 173 and maybe more. So then you have a big collection in this department. So I start looking and I just get more interested on bats. And yeah, at one point I was very lucky because a researcher from the US come to Ecuador and he wanted to do also some research with bats. So I joined him and I could make my bachelor thesis with bats as well. So since then I work with bats, and like I said before, when I started working, I saw also the social context of conservation and also bats. And then I go back to school to do the master to understand people actually.
Is there actually a lot of bats here in the Netherlands, in Groningen, and in Europe?
There is like 54 bats in the European countries. The Netherlands have 21 registered in all of the country, but six of them are the most common. And here in Groningen, six bats are the most common bats that you can see often. And some of these bats are really used to live in a human-made infrastructure, like houses, buildings. Other ones they like old buildings or abandoned buildings, etc. So yeah, there is a lot of bats living in urban areas as well. Yeah.
For someone who doesn't know what exactly the relationship with humans and bats are, I mean, I guess that's a very general question. What is the relationship, if there is any, between humans and bats?
Well, if you think about like bats are a big group of mammals and they are widespread around the world, they practically live in every ecosystem except for the poles and maybe very specific and isolated islands. But they are spread around the world and they play different like roles in the ecosystem as well and the environment. But in every part of the world, the bats are also part of the imagination of the people. Um, so, for example, in north part of Australia, in the region of Kimberley, they found a cave with some drawings. They are about 20 or 25,000 years ago, and this is like a bunch of bats hanging, upside down, probably flying foxes because that kind of species of bats are also more from that region. So at that point, they were already having an impression on the first group of humans. So they were like painted there. And then later on, you can also find things in the Bible that is talking about bats, and in the Greek myths also you have some stories with bats and things. So they are really part of this process of the culture as well. If you go to South America, there are some pre-Columbian cultures that also have some symbolism with using bats. And in the Mesoamerican and Mexico and that part, with they have actually a god that is called Camazotz, that is part human, part bat. So there has been present and in the long period of the humanity. But one thing maybe could be interesting to say, like for example, if you think about tequila, would you think that is somehow related with bats? Not right. Maybe you would be like, I don't have an idea why are we talking about tequila and bats. But actually, the flowers of agave are pollinated by bats. So the agaves need to make tequila. And tequila is not just an alcoholic drink, it's also part of the culture in Mexico, and also has a good economic business. So if you see the change, like what the pollination of a bat can do, that you can drink tequila in a bar here in Groningen. Yeah, so we are connected in different ways. Maybe we don't know yet how they work.
So you mentioned the cultural significance and the very fun fact about tequila. I actually did not know that at all. I assume though, in pop culture, bats usually have a very negative connotation, especially when you think about Halloween in North America. It's usually sort of symbolizing sort of like a dark side or an evil. Um, I guess bats kind of play a bit of a role in both those cultures, I guess, so to
Yeah,
say.
if you look at the Western culture, for example, they are always kind of related a little bit with the religion as well. Because if you see in the symbols or the icons and in the religion context, you can see, for example, angels and goats, they have wings from birds. But when you are talking about the devil or the sinners of hell, you always speak all of these characters with bad wings. So there was already this connection, like bats are nocturnal. They belong to the night. They are kind of mysterious, if you want to say it. So we as humans are afraid also of the dark, and we have a lot of connotation going out in the dark could be dangerous. So probably all of the animals that were like working in the night, they were also a bit scary at that point. So then all of the stories just grow around these perceptions as we humans have from animals and for bats as well. And then you have Dracula, and then you have vampires, and then you have all of these movies about gigantic bats eating people and killing people. So then all of the pop culture also influence how we perceive or how we relate with animals, and in this case with bats.
And does that stigma towards bats still carry today in your work here in the Netherlands and in Europe in general?
Well, reportings said like yeah, most of the cases people has these negative perceptions of bats because they are scared. There's also the stigma of the rabies. But as another mammal, also they are host of rabies as well. Um, Although the most cases of rabies in humans are probably through dogs or foxes. So they have it, but in the comparison, it would be very little people that got rabies by a bat in comparison with people that got it from dogs. So yeah, there is like this kind of things, and just think about like until the 1920, also was a very common practice in Europe, England, France, and the Netherlands even, to clip a bath in the top of your door in the entrance, so you avoid bad luck in your house. So it was just until 1920. So things are evolved and culture also evolve. So also how people see bats right now can be different. So in my research that I'm also looking for these connections here in Groningen, there are some positive things about it. Like for example, this is a group of people that are volunteers, and they is like the bat group of Groningen. So they volunteer to look for bats and to take care of bats and to um, count them, etc. They're very enthusiastic about it, and yeah, they do a lot of activities for bats and teaching and that stuff.
So we discussed a bit about, I guess, bats and sort of like folklore culture and how it's kind of perceived in different cultures and stuff. Are there any practical uses for bats for consuming, for medicine, things of that nature?
Well, yes, yes. For example, Asia, Africa, and the islands, the oceanic islands in the Pacific, are really bats are very popular in the menu. Um, so hunting bats and trading them and exporting maybe is really common. In some places like China, for example, they still use bats as medicine. Somehow this is related with asthma and chest pain. So there is already a book that somebody was doing also research on it, and they found that they think that the bats that live in caves, that they drink somehow water from the stalactites, they have the belief that if you eat these bats, you will have a better side eye, no side view, and also you will live longer. So it will be not surprising that until today people consume bats because there are old traditions on these in these places. And also, for example, the island of Guam and the Marianan Islands, they are very known because they eat bats as a delicacy, and they use this meat for special occasions, for parties, weddings, celebrations. And at one point, they almost um, kill all of the colonies of bats in these islands, and they start bringing food or bringing bat meat from other islands close by and also from the mainland. So yeah, there is still this kind of use of bats as bushmeat, and it is yeah very common practices on these areas.
What are the dangers of consuming bats or using bats as sort of like traditional medicine or as a delicacy? What are the risks that are associated with that?
This is a good topic right now actually, because we are just going through a pandemic that it is actually associated to the consumption of some kind of wild meat or bush meat and market in China. So um, normally bats are a good hostess of different pathogens. Actually, the ecosystem hosts pathogens. And when the ecosystem is healthy, they can keep these pathogens under control. And the same happen with bats. When bats are like in a good environment, they have enough food, they are not under stress, they can keep this virus in the body. They have a coevolution with this virus. So this virus doesn't attack the bats, and the bats don't do anything about it. So when they are healthy and they live in a healthy environment, they they don't have any problem with this. But when we are putting a lot of pressure on the environment, the ecosystems are not healthy enough. So they cannot restrain the pathogens anymore. It's the disrupted ecosystem make the wildlife also more vulnerable to have these pathogens or viruses more active. So if we are thinking people going and putting more pressure on hunting and getting more of this bushmeat to eat, then the chances that we eat a bat that is sick are higher. The chances that somebody get in contact with an animal that is sick, it's just a recipe to have a pandemic. So yeah, I think we have to kind of rethink about this consumption of bushmeat, especially when we are having a ecosystem that is going under a lot of pressure, and also the climate change combination. So that is quite of a recipe for disaster.
And if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned that bats could be considered a precursor for this COVID-19 pandemic, but they are also precursors for other uh, illnesses such as Ebola, correct?
Yeah. Also, there is like these zoonotic diseases that jump from animals to humans are being part of the history, you know. But in the since 1940, all of these diseases are becoming related with the disruption of change of land use, the expansion of agricultural lands, hunting of wildlife, and it's not just Ebola, but it could be also SARS, Ebola, and now COVID. That somehow they found some connection with bats. The last one, the coronavirus, the COVID-19, actually, they found that was in relationship with bat because different institutions run the DNA of the virus, and the DNA of the virus is very similar to other viruses that bats have. So that is how they connected. And yeah, I mean, like for example, Lyme. You know, this disease that is also really quiet but very damaging in your body is also because a tick that somehow all the people in the US were just expanding and then just arrived to an area that they have this kind of tick, and then Lyme was spread. Same with bats. A bat that is under stress with a lot of mix in the market with a lot of animals. So these kind of things, like you have the bad luck that they are in the right place in the right moment. So this virus can jump from one animal to another animal and finally to a human host. And that is what happened with COVID-19. And we are like a year and a half in quarantine for that.
I want to read a quote that I found from the World Wildlife Report of
Hmm.
2020, and I'm going to quote here. They mentioned that without human interference through capturing, slaughtering, selling, trafficking, trading, and consuming of wildlife, the evolution and transmission of the coronavirus that causes COVID-19 would have been highly unlikely. What do you make of this?
Yeah, that is a fact. I mean, our ecosystems are getting unhealthy because of the human pressure, because our activities, because the exploitation of forests, because we need more land to plant more corn or soya, whatever you want. So the ecosystem is getting weak. Think about like biodiversity is not just like cool animals there in the world. Biodiversity is actually like the immune system of the planet. So when you hunt and extinct animals, you are taking pieces of this immune system. And at one point, this immune system, that is biodiversity, we cannot, they will not be capable to restrain the pathogens anymore. So we as humans doing this, we are putting ourselves in danger because the earth is going to stay and somehow biodiversity can come back, but we can disappear. So yeah, it is just like that.
So I want to bring the topic back to
Hmm.
the trading of bats and the black market. You're kind of relating it more to illicit trade. So based on your knowledge, where does the majority of the black market for bats occur, and how big is the trade?
Mm. There is like a lack. of information on that part because um, bats are widespread worldwide, but the conservation or laws or regulations are very different in each country and in each region. So, for example, in Asia and Africa, there are not restrictions to consume or hunt bats. Uh, in Europe, it is forbidden to do that. In Australia, you can hunt bats, but you cannot treat them. So um, that kind of things make this topic very difficult to map. However, if we think about the example of the island of Guam and the Marianas Island, when they start consuming the bats too much, that they were almost to eliminate the whole species there, some international organization they or say like, okay, you have to stop it because they are going to disappear, la la la. So they stop. They put a regulation. They put they forbidden to kill the animals in the island. But what this create was a more broad market. So then they start to consume bats from other islands and also mainland. So sending this meat to to these islands, not just one, but Marianas and all of these islands in Oceania, they create kind of a market there. So, for example, if you want to buy a piece of bat or a bat unit in Indonesia, in some regions of Indonesia, they still consume bats. It can cost for you $1. But the moment that they want to trade this meat in an illegal way and send it to islands that they are still a big demand of bats, the amount can increase until 120 or 130 dollars. So you can see how one the same piece, the same bat. And if you have to think about, sometimes you need maybe two, three, depending of the species. If it's a big species with a small one, three, four, five for celebration, so that you can make your numbers. So it can be a very good business for those. But it's very difficult to find it because, as I said, some places are protected and in other places are not. There was a report about some time ago that in the airport in France they found a package with bat meat and also porcupine meat. So this kind of things happen, but sometimes under the radar. So there's just, yeah, it's still very difficult to get it, because if you make a comparison with like ivory or other big animals with big pieces, uh, and this is like an international legislation that you say you cannot use ivory; it's forbidden in every part of the world. Um, that but with bats it's very different. So I think, yeah, that would be a interesting way to, well, to see how it can work.
And why do you think, in the ivory trade, it's become a very universal thing where everybody has collectively agreed that this is something that it's not good.
Mhm.
Why is that not the case when it comes to bat meat or exotic meat in general?
Because, for example, the legislation in each country is different. Um, for example, in India, they have four categories for animal conservation. The first category, where you have big mammals like tigers or animals that have some kind of representation in the value for the wildlife. But bats are placed in the last category as pests. So there is not any conservation whatsoever guideline for them. You are entitled to kill them or to use them or to hunt them. If you go to Europe, for example, the law is really more strict. The European Union has a framework for conservation of nature, wildlife, plants, and animals. And bats are actually in the highest category of conservation. So it means that you cannot kill them, you cannot destroy the places that they sleep, you cannot destroy the places that they eat, you cannot destroy even the places that they move on it. So it's really a strong law. If you want to destroy your house or you want to do some renovations or something here in the Netherlands, for example, you need a permit that the municipality or the local government will give to you. Before that, you cannot do anything, and you have to prove that you don't have bats or another animals. I think some kind of sparrows are living in your house. So the regulations in each region and also in each country can make a difference for also the control and the trade of um, animals, and in this case, the bats. So yeah, that is something that it has to be maybe reviewed, especially now that you have these issues with zoonotic diseases and bats, food, etc. So yeah, that is most the case. Mhm.
So with the inconsistencies in regulation across the world and between countries, I mean, is there anything that can be done to better protect bats against the threats that they pose?
Mm. I think first of all, I think the regulations and for protection of animals or for protection of bats in this case is really associated with the framework of the each country, like social, economic, biodiversity, etc. For example, if you go to South America, in my country, in Ecuador, we have regulations for wild animals, and but we have still a lot of national parks and reserves and forest green areas. So we I think that animals and wildlife and bats they live in the forest. So the regulations are very specific to protect the animals that are placed and living in these forests, not necessarily the ones that are living in cities or in urban places. Like I said, in India, you have these categories, and bats are in the pest uh, section. Europe is stronger about it. But if you go to Australia, there is a lot of conflict between humans and bats. So mm, the urban is moving more to the areas, the green areas, right? So the bats doesn't have any place to go. So the bats are moving to the urban areas. But when they move to the urban areas, the conflict started. And in Australia, you can actually shoot a bat if it is in your property or if the bat is eating in your plantation of mangoes or any kind of fruit. So you are allowed to protect your property and you can shoot them. So with the, I think it's like it. I think the pandemic is gonna make um, different organizations to think about it. China already after the COVID-19 was just named as pandemia, they forbidden the use of bushmeat and they close um, markets with bushmeat. That is one start to think. But I think we have to also go to the base and try to understand why still people is like demanding this kind of meat, why they want to eat this, why this is so connected to their own celebration and part of the culture. And from that, I think maybe try to rework the knowledge with them and try to, um, teach them there is also other options and there is a danger also in the consumption of this meat. But that is what I am looking now at how people understand animals and how people relate with animals, because I think you need to understand also the 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 desires and the knowledge of the people, how what they want, why they do that, why they are still asking for things. So that is one part. And from other part, also the regulations, legislations through local governments and also regional governments and or organizations, so they can do something uh, about it. Sorry.
Oh, that was too funny. That's okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess so you mentioned that in China now they have prohibited the use of bushmeat, but there's still sort of like, as you mentioned earlier, um, there are claims that bats can be used for medicine and that it can kind of increase these, certain elements in really chest pain and things like that. Do you think that things like that and sort of like cultural significance in place and its practical use act as limitations towards regulation changes?
Hmm. I think the cultural use of I think culture can also evolve. I think once we can also understand why the people is so attached to this kind of consumption, we can also find better tools to work with these people. The fact that China at least closed these markets, and they just closed the market during the pandemic. We don't know still if they're gonna continue keeping these kind of markets closed after the pandemic is resolved. But I think that is already a big step, especially for because China is one of the biggest consumer of wild meat in the world. Um, so they have a lot of perceptions of medicine related with animals, and so I think we really have to see in deep why this is coming from, um, and how people can switch to other um, perceptions and attitudes to these animals.
And now, I guess, as a follow-up question to that, with these new prohibitions, it is it likely that we will see a larger black market for bats and wildlife meat now?
Yeah, most of the time when you have these very strong laws or enforcement of the law, you also create these underground black markets. So I think that for the moment, like the prohibition of using this kind of meat or open these kind of markets is kind of okay, but at long term, I think is also you have to look at, for example, um, research is needed, education is needed, but also regulate hunting is needed. If it is really difficult to take out of some cultural practices, I don't know, some kind of animal or bats, maybe you can also negotiate, okay, you can do it maybe for a season or you can do it maybe just once in a year or something like this. If it is really important from some cultural groups or religious or something. Because when you forbid something is when also it becomes more desirable, the prices go also higher, and the traffic is also more active in this context. I think, yeah, it is not just one rule to fix something. You have to make it a whole plan as education, research, protect local colonies of bats, regulate hunting, maybe increase some other kind of incomes, tourism instead of bat soup. I don't know. So you can think about many other things you can do.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to sit with us today. We really appreciate it, and we wish you the best of luck on your research.
Thank you very much.